The iron shackles around Fiona Jefferson's wrists had worn grooves into her skin so deep that she wondered if the marks would ever fade. Though freedom seemed such a distant dream that worrying about scars felt like a luxury she could not afford. The year was 1878, and the saloon in Calistoga, California, reeked of whiskey, tobacco, and the bitter stench of desperation. Fiona stood on a wooden platform that had been hastily constructed in the corner, her bare feet cold against the planks, her dress little more than rags barely covering her thin frame. Around her, men shouted numbers and crude remarks, their voices blending into a cacophony that made her head spin. She kept her green eyes downcast, focusing on a knot in the wood beneath her feet, trying to disappear into herself the way she had learned to do over the past 3 years. 3 years since her father's gambling debts had condemned her to this hell. 3 years since she had been passed from one man to another like livestock, each claiming ownership through rigged card games, false debts, or outright trades. She was 21 now, though she felt ancient, worn down by hands that had no right to touch her and voices that treated her as less than human. The current bidding was between a cattle rancher named Dutch Harmon, whose breath could strip paint from a wall, and a mine owner called Pike Stevens, who had a reputation for working his people to death. Fiona did not know which fate would be worse. She only knew that tomorrow would be like yesterday and the day before that, stretching back into an endless nightmare. Then a new voice cut through the din, calm and steady as a river stone. $500. The room went silent. Fiona's eyes flicked up despite herself, searching for the source of that voice. A tall man stood near the bar, his hat pulled low over his face, but she could see a strong jaw covered in dark stubble and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a dusty coat over simple rancher's clothes, nothing fancy, but he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made other men step back. 500, Pike Stevens sputtered. That's more than triple the current bid. You've lost your mind, stranger. Maybe, the man said, his voice still even. But that's my offer. Take it or leave it. The man running the auction, a greasy weasel named Silas who claimed to be collecting her father's debts, practically salivated at the sum. Sold to the gentleman at the bar. Come collect your property, sir. Property. The word made Fiona's stomach turn, but she stood still as the tall stranger approached. He counted out bills from a leather wallet, more money than Fiona had seen in years, and handed them to Silas without taking his eyes off the transaction. When Silas produced a key for her shackles, the stranger took it and finally looked at her. His eyes were not cruel. That was the first thing she noticed. They were not kind either exactly, but they held something she had not seen in a long time. Respect, or at least the foundation of it. Come on, he said quietly, unlocking her shackles. They fell to the platform with a clang that echoed in the hushed room. Let's get you out of here. Fiona's legs nearly gave out when she tried to walk. The stranger caught her elbow, his touch gentle, supporting rather than grasping. They made it to the door before Dutch Harmon's voice rang out. Hold on there. I want to see proof those bills are genuine. $500 for a used-up girl. Something's not right. The stranger went very still. Fiona felt the tension coil through his arm where he still supported her. When he spoke, his voice had gone cold. You calling me a cheat? I'm saying I want to examine those bills, Dutch said, emboldened by the whiskey in his system and the men at his back. The transaction is complete, the stranger said. Touch those bills and you're stealing from Silas here. Take it up with him. He did not wait for a response. In one smooth motion, he swept Fiona up into his arms and carried her through the swinging doors into the night air. Behind them, voices rose in argument, but the stranger walked steadily down the street to where a horse stood waiting, a sturdy bay gelding with kind eyes. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I used to," Fiona whispered. Her voice sounded rusty, unused. She rarely spoke these days. "Good enough." He set her on the horse first, then swung up behind her, keeping a respectful distance even as he reached around to take the reins. "Hold on to the saddle horn. We've got a ways to go." They rode through Calistoga's darkened streets, past the other saloons and gambling halls, past the general store and the church that had never once opened its doors to help her. The night air was cool against Fiona's face, carrying the scent of wild grass and distant pine trees. She breathed it in, this first taste of something beyond stale smoke and sweat, and felt tears prick her eyes. The stranger did not speak as they rode, and Fiona was grateful. She did not know what to say, did not know what he expected of her. $500 was a fortune. What did he want in return? Her hands trembled where they gripped the saddle horn. After about an hour, they reached a small ranch nestled in a valley. A modest house stood beside a barn, corrals stretching out into the darkness. A few cattle lowed in the distance. It looked peaceful, almost unreal after years of chaos. The stranger dismounted and helped her down, his hands careful. "Name's Mason Brooks," he said. "This is my place. Come inside. You must be hungry." Fiona followed him into the house, her bare feet padding softly on the wooden porch. Inside, the space was simple but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a table and chairs sat near a small kitchen area, and she could see 2 doors leading to what must be bedrooms. Mason lit a lamp and gestured to the table. "Sit. I'll fix something to eat." "Why?" The word escaped before Fiona could stop it. Mason paused in his movement toward the kitchen, his back to her. "Why what? Why did you buy me? What do you want?" He turned then, and in the lamplight she could see his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than she had thought, maybe 26 or 27, with strong features and those gray eyes that seemed to see right through her defenses. "I heard about what Silas and his crew were doing. Trading women like cattle, claiming false debts. It's wrong. My mother always taught me that when you see something wrong and have the power to stop it, you do. You spent $500 on a principal." Fiona could not keep the disbelief from her voice. "I spent $500 on a human being's freedom," Mason corrected. "And I aim to make sure it sticks. Tomorrow, we'll ride into town and I'll file papers declaring your father's debts paid in full through my purchase. Then I'll file additional papers releasing you from any obligation to me. You'll be a free woman, legally and officially." Fiona stared at him. "I don't understand." Mason moved to the kitchen and began pulling out bread, cheese, and what looked like leftover roast beef. "It's simple. You're a person, not property. No one should own you. Once the papers are filed, you can go wherever you want, do whatever you want. I'll stake you enough money to get started wherever you choose." "You're just going to let me go?" Fiona's voice cracked. "Just like that. That's the idea." Mason set the food on the table. "But it's late now and you look dead on your feet. Eat something, get some rest. We'll handle the paperwork tomorrow." Fiona looked at the food, her stomach cramping with hunger, but she could not move. It had to be a trick. Men did not spend fortunes on women and then just let them go. There had to be a catch, something he wanted, some terrible price she would have to pay. Mason seemed to read her thoughts. He sat down across from her, his movements slow and deliberate, non-threatening. "I know you've got no reason to trust me. I know you've been hurt in ways I can only imagine. But I give you my word on my mother's grave that you're safe here. You can lock the bedroom door from the inside. I'll sleep out here. In the morning, if you want to leave right then without even doing the paperwork, I'll take you to the stagecoach and buy you a ticket anywhere you want to go." Something in his voice, in the steadiness of his gaze, made Fiona want to believe him. She reached for the bread with shaking hands, tore off a piece, and brought it to her mouth. The taste exploded across her tongue, simple wheat and salt, but somehow the most delicious thing she had ever eaten. She began to cry then, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body, tears streaming down her face as she shoved bread and cheese into her mouth, unable to stop either the crying or the eating. Mason did not try to comfort her or tell her to stop. He simply sat there, a steady presence, occasionally pushing the food closer when she reached for more. When she finally slowed, hiccuping and exhausted, he poured her a cup of water from a pitcher. "The bedroom on the left is yours," he said quietly. "There's a basin and pitcher for washing, clean nightclothes in the dresser. Take whatever time you need." Fiona nodded, not trusting her voice. She stood on unsteady legs and made her way to the room he had indicated. Inside, she found a simple bed with clean sheets, a dresser, a washstand with the promised basin and pitcher, and a window overlooking the dark valley. She closed the door and, after a moment's hesitation, turned the lock. She washed her face and hands in the cool water, watching years of grime swirl away. In the dresser, she found a nightshirt that was far too large, clearly Mason's, but it was clean and soft against her skin. She crawled into the bed, expecting to lie awake all night listening for footsteps, for the door to burst open, for the reality she knew to reassert itself. Instead, she fell asleep almost instantly, her body surrendering to exhaustion it had been fighting for years. When Fiona woke, sunlight streamed through the window. For a moment she could not remember where she was, panic flaring hot in her chest. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back and she sat up, her heart pounding. Had it been real? Was she truly in a locked room safe with a full stomach? She climbed out of bed and tried the door, still locked from her side. She opened it carefully and peered out into the main room. Mason sat at the table, mending what looked like a bridle, his movements practiced and efficient. He glanced up when he heard the door open. "Morning," he said. "There's coffee on the stove and I can make breakfast if you're hungry." "I can help," Fiona said, then immediately wondered why she had offered, but Mason just nodded and went back to his mending. Fiona found the coffee pot and poured herself a cup, the bitter warmth spreading through her chest. She located eggs and a pan, and before long she was cooking breakfast, moving around the kitchen with growing confidence. It felt strange to do something so normal, so domestic, without fear hovering over her shoulder. They ate in companionable silence. Mason did not press her with questions or demands. When they finished, he cleared his throat. "If you're still willing, we can ride into town and handle that paperwork." "But I meant what I said last night. If you'd rather just go, I'll take you to the stage right now." Fiona considered this. The smart thing would probably be to run, to get as far from California as possible, to disappear where no one like Silas could ever find her again. But something made her hesitate. Mason had kept his word about the locked door, about not touching her, about breakfast and coffee and treating her like a person. Maybe he would keep his word about the rest too. "The paperwork," she said. "I want it official, I want proof." Mason nodded. "Then we'll get you some proper clothes first. Can't have you walking around town in a nightshirt." He led her back to the bedroom and opened the wardrobe she had not looked in the night before. Inside hung several simple dresses, all roughly her size. At her questioning look, he said, "These were my sisters. She moved to San Francisco a few years back, got married, told me to keep them in case she visited, but I think she'd be glad to know they're going to good use." Fiona selected a plain blue calico dress, and Mason stepped out while she changed. The dress fit reasonably well, if a little loose in places. She had lost weight over the past 3 years. There were even shoes, sturdy boots that were only slightly too large. She stuffed the toes with spare cloth and emerged feeling more human than she had in memory. The ride into Calistoga was tense for Fiona. She kept expecting men to recognize her, to try to stop them, but Mason rode with the same calm confidence as before. They went straight to the land office where a clerk named Timothy sat behind a desk covered in papers. "Morning, Mason," Timothy said, looking up. "What can I do for you?" "Need to file some papers," Mason said. He laid out the bill of sale from Sela's, along with documents he had clearly prepared beforehand. "I purchased Miss Fiona Jefferson's debt from Sela's Marlowe last night. I'm here to officially declare that debt paid in full and to file a legal release of any and all claims on Miss Jefferson's person or property." Timothy's eyebrows rose. "That's unusual. You sure about this?" "Completely," Mason said. His voice was firm, brooking no argument. Timothy shrugged and began processing the papers. As he worked, the door opened and Silas himself walked in, likely having heard they were in town. His eyes widened when he saw them. "Well, well," Silas said, his voice oily. "The happy couple, come to make it legal." "In a manner of speaking," Mason said. "I'm releasing Miss Jefferson from any obligation. She's a free woman as of today." Silas's face went red. "Now hold on. You can't just let her go. That's $500 walking away." "I can do whatever I want," Mason said, his voice going cold again. "I paid you your money. The debt is cleared. What I do after is my business." "There are other debts," Silas sputtered. "Her father owed money all over town." "Funny how those debts keep multiplying," Mason observed. "Show me documentation of these other debts." Signed promissory notes, witnessed and dated before the original debt was incurred. Otherwise, this sounds like an attempt at fraud. Silas's eyes darted around the room looking for support, but Timothy was watching him with new suspicion. "I'll find those papers," Silas threatened. "You haven't heard the last of this." "I think I have," Mason said. "But if you want to press the issue, we can involve the sheriff. I'm sure he'd be very interested in your business practices, including how you acquired Miss Jefferson in the first place. I hear her father's been dead for 2 years, which makes me wonder how he could have accumulated fresh gambling debts in that time." Fiona's breath caught. Her father was dead. She had not known. No one had told her. Silas's face went from red to white. Without another word, he turned and fled the office. Timothy watched him go, then looked at Mason with something like respect. "You've made an enemy there." "I can live with that," Mason said. He turned to Fiona. "I'm sorry. I should have told you about your father before. I found out when I was looking into your situation. He died of fever 2 years back. Silas kept it quiet so he could keep collecting on debts that should have died with him." Fiona felt numb. Her father had been a weak man, a gambler who had sold his own daughter to cover his losses, but he had still been her father. To learn he had been dead for 2 years, that she had been suffering for nothing, for debts that were not even real anymore. "Miss Jefferson." Timothy's voice broke through her thoughts. "I need you to sign here, acknowledging your release." Fiona stepped forward and signed her name in careful script, the pen feeling strange in her hand after so long. Timothy countersigned, added his official seal, and handed her a copy of the documents. "You're legally free, Miss Jefferson. Anyone who tries to claim otherwise will have to answer to the law." Outside the land office, Fiona stood blinking in the sunlight, the papers clutched in her hand. Free. The word did not seem real. "What do you want to do now?" Mason asked. Fiona looked down at the papers, at Mason's profile, at the street stretching away in both directions. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've spent 3 years being told what to do, where to go, who to serve. I don't remember how to choose." "That's all right," Mason said. "You've got time to figure it out. No one's rushing you." They walked to the general store where Mason bought supplies. The shopkeeper, A woman named Mrs. Chen smiled kindly at Fiona and slipped an extra bag of peppermints into their order. "On the house," she said firmly when Mason tried to pay for them. "Welcome home, dear. Home." Another word that did not feel real, but Fiona found herself smiling back as they loaded the supplies onto the horse. A young boy ran up, breathless. "Mr. Brooks, Mr. Brooks. Your cattle broke through the fence in the north pasture. They're heading for the river," Mason cursed softly. "I've got to deal with that. Fiona, you can come with me or I can take you back to the house first, whichever you prefer." "I'll come," Fiona said, surprising herself. But the thought of being alone in the house, even that safe, quiet house, made her nervous. At least with Mason, she knew what to expect. They rode hard for the north pasture, the boy running ahead to show them the way. Sure enough, a dozen cattle had broken through a rotted section of fence and were ambling toward the river, where the current ran fast and dangerous. Mason immediately began working to turn them back, calling out directions to Fiona. She found herself responding instinctively, memories from childhood surfacing. Her family had owned a small farm before her father's gambling had destroyed them. She had grown up around animals, knew how to move to guide them without spooking them. Together, she and Mason slowly turned the cattle back toward the pasture, working in synchronized silence. It took over an hour, hot, sweaty work under the California sun. But finally, all the cattle were secured, and Mason was hammering new boards across the broken fence section. Fiona helped steady the boards, their hands occasionally brushing as they worked. Each touch made her flinch at first, but Mason never grabbed or held on, just brief contact and then space. Giving her room to breathe. When they finished, they stood looking at their handiwork, both breathing hard. "You're good with cattle," Mason observed. "Used to be," Fiona said, "before everything went wrong." "Well, you still are." Mason wiped sweat from his forehead. "If you wanted, there's plenty of work on the ranch. I could use the help and I'd pay you fair wages, but only if you wanted." "No obligation." Fiona looked at him, at the ranch stretching around them, at the cattle placidly grazing now that they were back where they belonged. "What kind of wages?" "Standard hands wages, plus room and board. Same as I'd pay any ranch hand. We draw up a proper contract, make it all legal and above board. You could leave any time you wanted with pay for the days you worked." It was tempting. More than tempting. Fiona had no money beyond what Mason had promised to stake her, no prospects, no family. The idea of riding off to some unknown city with nothing but hope was terrifying. But staying here, working for Mason, having time to heal and figure out what she really wanted, that felt possible. "I want to think about it," she said. "Fair enough," Mason agreed. "Take all the time you need." They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Fiona found herself watching Mason from the corner of her eye, trying to understand him. He was different from any man she had met. Quiet but not sullen, strong but not aggressive, confident but not arrogant. He had paid a fortune for her freedom and asked nothing in return. She did not understand it, but maybe that was all right. Maybe some things did not need to be understood right away. That evening, Fiona made dinner while Mason tended to the livestock. She found herself humming as she worked, an old melody her mother had sung before she died. The sound startled her. She had not hummed or sung in 3 years. When Mason came in, dusty and tired, he smiled at the smell of cooking food. "Smells amazing." "Just stew," Fiona said, but she felt a small glow of pride. They ate together, and afterward Mason pulled out a worn book. "I usually read a bit before bed," he said. "If you'd like to join me, you're welcome, or if you'd rather have privacy, that's fine too." Fiona hesitated, then sat down across from him. "What are you reading?" "Shakespeare," Mason said, holding up the book. Much Ado About Nothing. It was my mother's favorite. Would you read aloud?" The words escaped before Fiona could second-guess them. Mason's face lit up. "I'd be glad to." His voice was surprisingly good for reading, clear and expressive. Fiona found herself drawn into the story, into Beatrice and Benedict's witty sparring and the romantic tangles of the plot. It had been so long since she had heard a story, since she had thought about anything beyond surviving the next hour. When Mason finally closed the book an hour later, marking their place, Fiona felt almost drunk on the luxury of narrative. "Thank you," she said softly. "Anytime," Mason replied. "We can continue tomorrow if you'd like." That night, Fiona again locked her door and slept deeply. But this time, her dreams were not nightmares. She dreamed of open fields and cattle lowing and a quiet voice reading poetry into the evening air. Over the next week, they fell into a routine. Fiona cooked and cleaned, helped with the livestock, and slowly learned the rhythms of ranch life. Mason was patient with her, showing her how to handle different tasks without ever making her feel incompetent. In the evenings, they read together or sometimes just talked, sharing stories from their pasts. Fiona learned that Mason's father had died when he was young, leaving him and his sister to be raised by their mother, a formidable woman by all accounts. She had taught Mason to read and write, to think for himself, and to stand up for what was right. She had died of pneumonia 4 years ago, leaving Mason the ranch and, apparently, a powerful moral compass. Fiona, in turn, began to share pieces of her own story. How her mother had died when she was 15. How her father had taken to gambling afterward, trying to escape his grief, but only creating more pain. How one night he had lost everything, including her, in a card game he swore was rigged. How she had been passed from man to man, never staying anywhere long enough to establish any kind of life, always just property to be used and traded. Mason listened without judgment, his gray eyes serious. "That's over now," he said quietly. "You're not property. You're not anyone's bargaining chip. You're Fiona Jefferson, and you get to decide what comes next." By the end of the week, Fiona had made her decision. "I'd like to take that job," she told Mason one evening. "The ranch hand position with a proper contract." Mason nodded, pulling out papers he had clearly prepared in advance. The contract was straightforward. Standard wages, room and board provided, either party could terminate with a week's notice. At the bottom, both their signatures making it official. "Welcome to the team," Mason said, shaking her hand formally. Then his expression softened. "I'm glad you're staying." "So am I," Fiona admitted. As spring turned to summer, Fiona grew stronger. The constant work filled out her frame, putting meat back on her bones and muscle on her arms. Her skin, which had been pale and sallow, gained color from hours in the sun. She learned to rope and brand cattle, to mend fences, to ride for hours checking the property lines. Mason treated her exactly as he said he would, as a working partner on the ranch, and Fiona found pride in her growing competence. But it was more than just the work. It was the way Mason said good morning with a smile, the way he asked her opinion on ranch decisions, the way he read to her in the evenings with that expressive voice. It was small moments. Him teaching her to play chess on a board his mother had carved, both of them laughing when she beat him for the first time. Him showing her his mother's grave on a hill overlooking the valley, sharing that private grief with her. Her teaching him a recipe her mother had made, watching his face light up at the taste of something new. Fiona found herself watching him more and more. The way he moved, economical and graceful. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. The way he was unfailingly gentle with the animals, and with her, never raising his voice, never using his strength to intimidate. She had not thought she could ever feel this way about a man again, had thought that part of her was dead, killed by 3 years of horror. But apparently it was not dead, just dormant, waiting for someone safe. One evening in late summer, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Mason was whittling a piece of wood, his hands moving with practiced ease while Fiona mended a shirt that had torn on a fence post. "Can I ask you something?" Fiona said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Always," Mason replied, not looking up from his whittling. "Why haven't you married? You've got a good ranch, you're young, you're—" She hesitated, searching for words that would not reveal too much. "You're a good man. Surely there are women who have shown interest." Mason's hands stilled. He was quiet for a long moment, and Fiona worried she had overstepped. But when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than angry. "There was someone once. A girl named Sarah from town. We were courting, had even talked about marriage, but then my mother got sick. Sarah said she'd wait, but as the illness stretched on, as I spent all my time and money caring for Ma, Sarah got impatient. She married a banker from Sacramento instead." "I'm sorry," Fiona said softly. Mason shrugged. "It was for the best. If she couldn't handle hard times, she wouldn't have made a good partner anyway. A ranch wife needs strength, needs to be willing to work side by side with her husband, not just wait around to be taken care of." He paused, then added quietly, "Someone like you, actually." Fiona's breath caught. She looked at him, but he was focused intently on his whittling, his face carefully neutral. "Mason, I'm not saying that to pressure you," he said quickly. "I know you've been through hell. I know you need time to heal, if you ever can heal from something like that. I'm just saying, when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd be honored to court you properly. But there's no rush, no expectation. You can work here as long as you want, with things staying exactly as they are." Fiona's heart was pounding. She thought about the past months, about how safe she had felt, how valued. She thought about Mason's gray eyes and gentle hands and the way he read Shakespeare in the evenings. She thought about waking up each morning knowing she would see him, work beside him, share meals and conversation and comfortable silence. "What if I said I was ready now?" she whispered. Mason's hands went completely still. He set down his whittling and finally looked at her, those storm-gray eyes searching her face. "Are you sure? Fiona, I don't want you to feel obligated. I don't want you to think you owe me anything because I bought your freedom." "That's not what this is," Fiona said, and as she spoke the words, she knew they were true. "You've spent months showing me what a good man looks like. You've given me space to heal, time to remember who I am. You've treated me with respect and kindness, and you've never, not once, made me feel afraid. I'm not ready for everything yet, but I'd like to try courting, if the offer's still open." A smile spread slowly across Mason's face, transforming his usually serious expression into something almost boyish. "The offer's definitely still open." They sat together on the porch as the sun finished setting, their hands gradually moving closer until their fingers intertwined, and Fiona felt something she had not felt in years: hope. The courtship was everything Fiona had not known she needed. Mason continued to be patient, letting her set the pace for everything. Their first kiss happened 2 weeks later, brief and sweet on that same porch. Fiona had been terrified, her body remembering every forced touch, but Mason had been so gentle, giving her every opportunity to pull away, that when their lips finally met, it felt like reclaiming something stolen rather than surrendering anything. They worked the ranch together during the day, and in the evenings they talked about the future. Mason wanted to expand the herd, maybe add some horses for breeding. Fiona suggested they could grow vegetables to sell in town, use a corner of the property that was not good grazing land. They made plans together, as partners, and Fiona felt herself slowly transforming from a woman who had been traded like cattle into a woman who owned her own destiny. Word got around town about their courtship, and reactions were mixed. Most people were supportive, having heard about Fiona's circumstances and admiring Mason's principles. But there were others, like Silas and Dutch Harmon, who muttered about impropriety and Mason being taken in by damaged goods. One day in town, Dutch got drunk enough to say something crude within Fiona's hearing. Mason was across the street, but he saw Fiona's face go pale. He was at her side in an instant, and when Dutch opened his mouth to say more, Mason's fist connected with his jaw in a clean, hard punch that sent the older man sprawling. "You'll speak of Miss Jefferson with respect," Mason said, his voice deadly quiet, "or you won't speak at all. Your choice." Dutch, seeing the cold fury in Mason's eyes, chose silence. He picked himself up and staggered away. Mason turned to Fiona, and the fury drained from his face, replaced by concern. "Are you all right?" Fiona was shaking, but not with fear, with something else, something fierce and warm. "I'm fine. Thank you for defending me." "Always," Mason said simply. As autumn painted the valley in shades of red and gold, Mason asked Fiona to marry him properly. They were on the hill overlooking the ranch, near his mother's grave, and he went down on one knee with a simple gold band that had been his grandmother's. "Fiona Jefferson, you're the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. You've been through things that would have broken most people, but you've come through it with your spirit intact. I love you. I love your strength, your humor, your determination. I love the way you hum when you cook and the way you argue with me about fence placement. I love working beside you and reading with you and just sitting in silence with you. Will you marry me?" Fiona looked at this man who had bought her freedom and given her back herself, who had shown her that not all men were monsters, that love did not have to hurt. Tears streamed down her face, but for once they were happy tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married in November of 1878 in a small ceremony at the Calistoga Church. Mrs. Chen stood as witness, along with Mason's sister Charlotte, who came from San Francisco with her husband. Fiona wore a cream-colored dress that Charlotte had brought as a gift, and Mason wore his Sunday best. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Mason kissed her with such tenderness that Fiona felt the last frozen pieces of her heart thaw. The wedding night was difficult. Fiona had agreed to marry Mason, loved him even, but years of trauma could not be erased by good intentions. In their bedroom, decorated with wildflowers that Mason had picked, Fiona found herself shaking, her body remembering violation even as her mind knew Mason would never hurt her. "We don't have to do anything," Mason said immediately, seeing her distress. "We can just sleep. We can wait as long as you need." "I want to," Fiona said, and it was true. I need you to be patient." "I've got all the time in the world," Mason assured her. They took it slowly, Mason following her lead on everything, stopping whenever she tensed, holding her when she cried. It was not perfect or romantic or anything like the novels Charlotte had giggled about, but it was healing. It was Fiona choosing to be touched, choosing intimacy with a man who loved her. And by the time dawn light filtered through the curtains, Fiona felt like she had crossed some invisible threshold, had reclaimed her body as her own. "I love you," she whispered against Mason's chest. "I love you too," he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Forever." The first year of marriage had its challenges. Fiona still had nightmares sometimes, waking up gasping and disoriented. Mason learned to wake her gently, to give her space to remember where she was, to hold her when she needed comfort and give her distance when she needed solitude. They argued occasionally, usually about ranch business, but they learned to communicate, to listen to each other, to compromise. The ranch prospered. Fiona's vegetable garden turned out to be a brilliant idea, providing both food for themselves and surplus to sell in town. Mason expanded the herd as planned, and together they built a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. Money was not plentiful, but it was steady, and they wanted for nothing essential. In the spring of 1880, Fiona realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with complicated emotions: joy at creating a life with Mason, fear about bringing a child into a world that could be so cruel, worry about whether she could be a good mother after everything she had been through. Mason, predictably, was unwaveringly supportive. "You're going to be an amazing mother," he told her, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "This child is lucky to have you." "How can you be sure?" Fiona asked. "What if I'm broken? What if what happened to me damaged me too much?" "You're not broken," Mason said firmly. "You're scarred, yes. You've been hurt. But you're also strong and kind and full of love. Our child will be lucky to learn from your strength." Fiona's pregnancy was difficult. Morning sickness plagued her for months, and the California heat that summer seemed particularly oppressive. But Mason was attentive without being smothering, taking on extra work around the ranch while still making sure Fiona felt involved in decisions. Charlotte visited twice, bringing baby clothes and advice, and Mrs. Chen stopped by regularly with special teas and remedies from her homeland. In November of 1880, on the second anniversary of their wedding, Fiona gave birth to a son. The labor was long and hard, attended by a midwife from town, and punctuated by Fiona's determination to see it through. When the baby finally emerged, screaming and red-faced and perfect, Fiona burst into tears. "A boy," the midwife announced, laying the baby on Fiona's chest. "Healthy and strong." Mason, who had been pacing outside, rushed in at the sound of crying. His face went soft when he saw his son, and when he looked at Fiona, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "You did it," he said, awed. "He's perfect. You're perfect." They named him Matthew Daniel Brooks, after Mason's father and Fiona's grandfather. Little Matthew had his father's gray eyes and his mother's auburn hair, and from the beginning he was a content baby, as if sensing the love that surrounded him. Fiona discovered that being a mother was both terrifying and wonderful. She worried constantly, especially in the early weeks, about doing something wrong. But Mason was a hands-on father, sharing the burden of nighttime feedings and diaper changes, and gradually Fiona's confidence grew. She found herself singing to Matthew old songs her mother had sung to her, and realized she was creating new memories to replace the painful ones. Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch continued to thrive, and now there was a child's laughter echoing through the house. Mason built a crib with his own hands, carving animals into the headboard. Fiona sewed quilts and clothes, her skills improving with practice. They took turns wearing Matthew in a sling as they did chores, introducing him early to the life they were building. When Matthew was 6 months old, Silas Marlowe died. News spread through town quickly. He had been caught cheating at cards one too many times, and the man he cheated had been less forgiving than most. Fiona felt nothing at the news, no satisfaction or grief or closure. Silas had been a symptom of a sick system, not the disease itself. His death changed nothing about what she had endured, but Mason, seeing her distant expression, pulled her close. "You never have to think about him again," he said. "He has no power over you anymore." And Fiona realized it was true. Somewhere in the past 2 years, Silas had become irrelevant. She had built a life beyond him, beyond all the men who had treated her as less than human. She had a husband who loved her, a son who depended on her, a ranch that was partly hers. She had become more than a survivor. She had become someone who thrived. As Matthew grew into a toddler, he showed signs of his parents' best qualities: Mason's quiet determination and Fiona's fierce independence. He learned to walk by pulling himself up on fence posts, determined to follow his parents as they worked. He learned to talk early, chattering constantly about the cattle and horses and everything he saw. "He's going to be a handful," Mason observed one day, watching their 2-year-old son attempt to rope a very patient barn cat. "Good," Fiona said. "The world needs more people who don't just accept what they're told." Mason looked at her, pride evident in his expression. "You've come so far," he said softly. "Do you realize that, from that night in the saloon to now, you've become the strongest person I know?" Fiona considered this. It was true that she was not the same broken woman Mason had bought freedom for, but she had not become strong alone. "We've come far," she corrected. "Together." In 1883, Fiona gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Florence Rose Brooks. Florence had Fiona's green eyes and Mason's dark hair, and from birth she was more contemplative than her boisterous brother. Matthew was fascinated by his baby sister, insisting on helping with everything, and Fiona's heart swelled watching her son's gentleness with the infant. The ranch continued to expand. With profits from the cattle and garden, they were able to buy adjacent land when a neighbor retired and moved to Sacramento. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, young men Mason trained with the same patience he showed everyone. Fiona managed the books and the garden and found she had a head for business that surprised her. By 1885, the Brooks Ranch was one of the most successful in the county. Success brought its own challenges. There were still people in town who whispered about Fiona's past, who looked down on her for having been traded between men, as if it had been her choice. There were men who assumed Mason must have married her out of pity and propositioned her when he was not around. Each incident stung, but Fiona had learned to hold her head high. She knew her worth now, knew that she was not defined by what had been done to her but by what she had built after. One day when Florence was 2 and Matthew 5, a woman came to the ranch. She was thin and exhausted-looking, with bruises barely concealed by her shawl. She knocked on the door, and when Fiona answered, the woman burst into tears. "Please," she said. "Mrs. Chen in town said you might help. My husband sold me to cover a debt. I escaped, but they're looking for me. I have nowhere to go." Fiona looked at this woman and saw herself 5 years ago. She pulled the woman inside without hesitation. "You're safe here," she said firmly. "No one will take you." The woman, whose name was Grace, stayed in their spare room for 2 weeks. In that time, Mason worked with the sheriff, who was more sympathetic than his predecessor, to document Grace's situation and arrest her husband for illegal debt bondage. The laws were slowly changing, becoming less tolerant of treating women as chattel, and Grace's case helped push that progress forward. When Grace finally left, heading to San Francisco with money for a fresh start and letters of introduction to Charlotte, she hugged Fiona tightly. "Thank you. You gave me hope that things could get better." After she left, Mason found Fiona on the porch staring out at the valley. "You all right?" he asked. "I was thinking about how far we've come," Fiona said. "Not just me, but all of us. Laws are changing. People like Grace have a better chance than I did. It's not enough, not yet, but it's something." "It's more than something," Mason said, sitting beside her. "And a lot of it is because of you. Because you survived and built a life, and now you're helping others do the same. You should be proud." Fiona leaned against him, feeling his solid warmth. "I am proud and grateful. For you, for our children, for this life. I never thought I could have this." "You deserve this and more," Mason said, kissing her temple. "You always did." As their children grew, Fiona and Mason made sure to teach them important lessons. They taught Matthew and Florence that all people deserved respect and dignity, regardless of their circumstances. They taught them that strength was not about dominance, but about standing up for what was right. They taught them that love was shown through actions, through daily kindness and support, not just words. Matthew grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch, following Mason everywhere and asking endless questions about cattle and land management. Florence was quieter but equally determined, with a gift for growing things. By the time she was 5, she had her own small section of the vegetable garden that she tended with fierce concentration. In 1888, Charlotte and her husband moved back to California, settling in Calistoga. They had 3 children of their own, and the cousins became close friends. Charlotte and Fiona grew close as well, bonding over the challenges of motherhood and running households. Charlotte, who had known something of Fiona's history from Mason, never treated her with pity but with genuine friendship and respect. The ranch continued to prosper. By 1890, they had over 300 head of cattle and had built a proper stable for a dozen horses. Mason taught Matthew and Florence to ride, patient with their early tumbles and celebrating their victories. Fiona managed the business side, proving to be a shrewd negotiator who got top prices for their cattle and produce. They had been married 12 years when Mason came home one evening looking troubled. "There's talk in town," he said. "Some of the old-timers remember your past. With the children getting older going to school in town, I'm worried they might hear things. We should probably talk to them first." Fiona had known this day would come, but still her stomach clenched. Matthew was 11 now, Florence 8, old enough to understand but young enough to be hurt by the ugly realities of what their mother had endured. They sat down with the children that evening after supper. Mason explained gently that their mother had been through difficult times before they were married, that bad men had treated her unfairly, and that some people in town might say unkind things about it. Matthew's young face went hard with anger. "Who?" he demanded. "Who's saying bad things about Ma?" "It doesn't matter," Fiona said quietly. "What matters is that you know the truth. I'm not ashamed of surviving. I'm not ashamed of the scars I carry, but I want you to hear about it from me, not from gossip in town." Florence, always the perceptive one, studied her mother's face. "Did people hurt you, Ma?" "Yes," Fiona said honestly, "but I survived, and I met your father and together we built this life. The hard times don't define me. What came after does." "You're the strongest person I know," Matthew said fiercely. "Anyone who says different is a liar." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. She gathered both children close, feeling Mason's hand warm on her shoulder. "Thank you, sweetheart, both of you. I'm so proud to be your mother." The talk must have helped, because when Florence came home a few weeks later saying some boys had teased her about her mother, she had responded with calm dignity that would have made Fiona proud. "My ma is stronger than all your mass put together," Florence had said. "She survived things you couldn't imagine and built a successful ranch." "What have your folks done?" The boys, apparently, had no answer to that. As the years passed, the Brooks family became pillars of the community. Mason served on the town council, advocating for fair labor practices and legal reforms. Fiona helped establish a women's aid society that assisted women in difficult situations, providing shelter and legal help. It was quiet work, not dramatic, but it made a difference to the women they helped. Matthew, as he grew into his teenage years, showed his father's steady character and his mother's determination. He talked about taking over the ranch someday, expanding it further. Florence, meanwhile, discovered a talent for painting, particularly landscapes and plants. Fiona encouraged this passion, buying her daughter supplies even when money was tight, remembering what it felt like to have every choice stolen. In 1895, when Matthew was 18 and preparing to take on more responsibility at the ranch, he met a girl in town. Her name was Sarah Chen, granddaughter of Mrs. Chen who had shown Fiona such kindness years before. Sarah was intelligent and hardworking, helping run her grandmother's store, and Matthew was smitten. "She's amazing, Ma," Matthew said, his face glowing. "Smart and funny, and she doesn't take any nonsense from anyone." Fiona watched her son fall in love and felt her heart swell. He would treat Sarah well, she knew. He had been raised to respect women as equals, to value strength and intelligence, to understand that partnership was the foundation of love. When Matthew asked permission to court Sarah, both families gave their blessing. The courtship was proper and sweet, and in 1896, they married in the same church where Mason and Fiona had wed 18 years before. Watching her son make his vows, Fiona thought about how far they had all come, how much had changed. Florence, at 14, rolled her eyes at all the romance, but Fiona caught her smiling during the ceremony. Her daughter was growing into a remarkable young woman, independent and artistic and kind. She talked about going to San Francisco to study art, and while the idea of her leaving made Fiona's heart ache, she would support her daughter's dreams absolutely. Matthew and Sarah built a small house on the ranch property, near enough for Matthew to work but far enough for privacy. Within a year, they announced they were expecting a child, and Fiona found herself preparing to become a grandmother at 39. "How did we get so old?" she asked Mason one evening, both of them gray-haired now but still healthy and strong. "By being lucky," Mason said simply. "By surviving and building a good life. By loving each other every day." Fiona leaned against him, comfortable in the easy intimacy of nearly 2 decades together. "Do you ever regret it, spending that $500 on a stranger?" Mason was quiet for a moment, his arm tightening around her. "That $500 was the best investment I ever made. It brought me you, and you brought me everything else. Children, grandchildren, a life richer than I ever imagined. The only thing I regret is that you had to suffer before we found each other." "I don't regret it," Fiona said, surprising herself. At Mason's questioning look, she explained, "If things had been different, I might have ended up with some nice boy from my village, had a perfectly ordinary life. But I wouldn't have met you. I wouldn't have learned how strong I could be. I wouldn't have built this life. I wouldn't trade what we have for anything, even to erase the pain." Mason kissed her forehead. "You're remarkable, you know that. I learned from the best," Fiona replied. In 1897, Matthew and Sarah's son was born, a healthy boy they named Michael. Holding her grandson for the first time, Fiona felt the circle complete somehow. Here was new life, innocent and perfect, born into a world that was slowly, painfully becoming more just. Michael would grow up knowing his grandmother's story, learning from it, but not defined by it. Florence left for San Francisco in 1898 to study art, though she promised to visit often. The house felt empty without her laughter and constant painting, but Fiona was proud of her daughter's courage in pursuing her passion. Charlotte wrote that Florence was thriving in the city, already gaining recognition for her botanical paintings. Mason and Fiona found themselves alone together for the first time in years, with Matthew and Sarah in their own house and Florence away at school. It was an adjustment, but not an unwelcome one. They took long rides together, exploring parts of the ranch they rarely had time to visit. They read books aloud in the evenings, returning to that early courtship ritual. They made love with the easy comfort of long familiarity mixed with renewed appreciation for each other. "We should take a trip," Mason suggested one evening. Maybe visit Florence in San Francisco, see the city. Fiona, who had not left Calistoga in 20 years, felt a flutter of anxiety. But she also felt curiosity. The world was changing, moving into a new century, and maybe she should see some of it. All right, she agreed. Let's go. San Francisco was overwhelming. So many people, so much noise, buildings taller than Fiona had imagined. But Florence met them at the train station with her usual enthusiasm, and seeing her daughter's excitement made the strangeness worthwhile. Florence showed them her studio, her paintings, introduced them to her fellow students. She was clearly happy, thriving in this environment, and that was all Fiona needed to see. They stayed a week, seeing the sights and spending time with Charlotte's family. On their last evening, Florence took them to a gallery where several of her paintings were on display. Fiona stood before a landscape of the ranch, painted from memory but capturing the essence of home perfectly, and felt tears stream down her face. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she managed to say. "It's home," Florence replied, hugging her mother. "No matter where I go, that's always home." On the train ride back to Calistoga, Mason held Fiona's hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how blessed I am," Fiona said. 22 years ago, I was standing on a platform being auctioned like livestock. I had lost everything. I thought my life was over. But instead, it was just beginning. You gave me that. You gave me the chance to become who I was meant to be." "No," Mason said firmly. "I gave you freedom. You did everything else yourself. The woman you became, the mother, the businesswoman, the advocate for others, that was all you." Fiona smiled. "Then we'll say we did it together. That's been the truth of our marriage anyway." "Together," Mason agreed. "Always." The new century arrived with celebration and hope. Fiona was 43, Mason 48, both still healthy and active. The ranch was more successful than ever. Matthew had proven to be an excellent manager, bringing new ideas while respecting the foundation his parents had built. Little Michael was a bright, curious 2-year-old who adored his grandparents. Florence had been commissioned to illustrate a botanical guide, her career taking off in ways she had only dreamed of. In 1902, the Women's Aid Society that Fiona had helped establish built a permanent shelter in Calistoga, funded by donations from throughout the county. At the dedication ceremony, Fiona gave a speech about the importance of giving women choices, of treating them as autonomous humans rather than property. She spoke from experience, not revealing details but making it clear she understood the struggle. The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, an elderly woman approached Fiona. "I remember you," she said, "from back in '78. I was in that saloon the night Mason Brooks bought you. I watched you leave and I prayed you'd find safety. I'm so glad my prayers were answered." Fiona took the woman's hands. They were, and now we're answering other women's prayers, together. That night, lying in bed beside Mason, Fiona reflected on the strange journey of her life. From victim to survivor to advocate, from property to wife to grandmother, from broken to healing to healed, it had not been easy. She still had nightmares occasionally, still flinched at sudden movements sometimes. The scars were still there, but they no longer defined her. "I love you," she said into the darkness. "I love you too," Mason replied sleepily. "Always have, always will." In 1905, Florence returned to Calistoga permanently, having established her reputation in San Francisco, but finding she missed the open spaces of home. She moved into a small cottage on the ranch property and continued her painting, now illustrating books and selling paintings to galleries throughout California. At 23, she met a young doctor who had come to town, and within a year they too were married. The wedding was joyful, another generation of the Brooks family beginning their own journey. Matthew and Sarah had two more children, daughters born in 1903 and 1906. Fiona loved being a grandmother, loved the chaos and laughter of family gatherings. She taught her grandchildren to garden, told them stories, showed them the same patient love Mason had shown her. Mason, now in his mid-50s, began to talk about stepping back from active ranch management, letting Matthew take over fully. "I want time to enjoy life," he told Fiona. "Time with you, with the grandchildren. Time to just be." Fiona agreed wholeheartedly. They had worked hard for 3 decades. They had built something lasting. Now they could enjoy it. In the summer of 1908, 30 years after Mason had bought Fiona's freedom, they gathered the whole family for a celebration. Matthew and Sarah with their 3 children, Florence and her husband, Charlotte's family from town. The ranch house overflowed with people, 3 generations laughing and talking and sharing food. Mason made a toast. "30 years ago, I made the best decision of my life. I met the woman who would become my partner in all things. Together, we've built this family, this community, this life. Fiona, you are my heart. You always have been." Fiona, tears streaming down her face, raised her own glass. "You gave me freedom, but more than that, you gave me love. You taught me that good men exist, that love doesn't have to hurt, that survival is not the end but the beginning. Thank you for every day of the past 30 years. Thank you for this family. Thank you for proving that happy endings are real." The family cheered and drank, and as Fiona looked around at all these faces she loved, at the life she had built from the ashes of trauma, she felt complete. The scared, broken woman on that platform was still part of her, would always be part of her story, but she was no longer the whole story. She was Fiona Brooks, wife, mother, grandmother, advocate, survivor, thriver. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Fiona and Mason sat on their porch watching the stars. The same porch where they had first held hands, first kissed, planned their future together. "You remember that first night?" Fiona asked. "When you brought me here and told me I was free?" "I remember you looked at me like I was crazy," Mason said with a chuckle. "Like you couldn't believe someone would do that without wanting something in return." "I had never met anyone like you," Fiona said. "I didn't know men like you existed." "I'm nothing special," Mason protested. "I just treated you like a human being." "That made you special," Fiona said softly. "That made all the difference." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined the way they had been for 3 decades. Fiona thought about all the women they had helped through the AIDS Society, all the lives that had been changed because one man had stood up and said trafficking human beings was wrong. The ripples spread outward, farther than they could see. "No regrets?" Mason asked. Fiona considered this seriously. There were things she wished had been different. She wished she had never been sold in the first place, wished she could have those 3 lost years back, wished she did not carry the scars she did. But if she could go back and change things, she might never have met Mason, never had Matthew and Florence, never built this life. "No regrets," she said finally. "Not about anything that matters." As they grew older, Fiona and Mason became the matriarch and patriarch of not just their family but the whole community. They were consulted on business matters, asked to mediate disputes, invited to speak at town meetings. Their story, once scandalous, had become inspirational, proof that people could overcome terrible circumstances and build beautiful lives. In 1912, Fiona turned 55. She was gray-haired and weathered, her hands marked by decades of work, her face lined with years of laughter and tears. But she stood straight and strong, still vital, still engaged with life. Mason, at 60, was much the same, a little slower but no less sharp. They had 7 grandchildren now, ranging from 15-year-old Michael to 1-year-old Thomas. The ranch had been passed fully to Matthew, though Mason still advised occasionally. Florence had published 3 botanical illustration books and was considered one of California's premier natural history artists. Both children were thriving. Both had strong marriages and happy families. "We did good," Mason said one evening, watching Michael help his grandfather repair a fence while the younger grandchildren played nearby. "We did," Fiona agreed. "We did very good." That winter, Mason caught pneumonia. It started as a simple cold but quickly worsened, his lungs filling with fluid despite the best efforts of Florence's doctor husband. Fiona stayed by his bedside for 2 weeks, holding his hand, reading to him when he could hear, praying when he could not. On a cold January morning in 1913, with Fiona holding his hand and their children gathered around, Mason Brooks died peacefully. His last words were, "Thank you for choosing me." Fiona's grief was overwhelming. After 34 years of partnership, of waking up beside him every morning and falling asleep beside him every night, the world without Mason felt impossible. But she was not alone. Matthew and Florence rallied around her, and the grandchildren needed their grandmother. She could not fall apart, not with so many depending on her. She buried Mason on the hill overlooking the ranch, beside his mother and father. The whole town came to the funeral, testament to the respect he had earned over a lifetime of principled living. Fiona stood beside the grave, dry-eyed and straight-backed, and spoke about the man who had changed her life. "Mason Brooks taught me what goodness looked like," she said. "He showed me that men could be gentle and strong, kind and firm, loving without being possessive. He gave me freedom and then gave me his heart. He was a good husband, a good father, a good grandfather, and a good man. The world is diminished by his loss." After the funeral, after everyone had left, Fiona sat alone on the hill beside the fresh grave. She talked to Mason, told him about her fears and her grief, thanked him one more time for everything. And when the sun began to set, painting the valley in colors of orange and gold, she stood and walked back down to the ranch. Mason was gone, but the life they had built together remained. Her children, her grandchildren, the ranch, the community they had helped shape, all of that was his legacy and hers. Fiona lived another 15 years after Mason's death. She remained active, helping with the grandchildren, advising Matthew on ranch business, continuing her work with the Aid Society. She never remarried. Mason had been her partner, her love, her freedom, and no one could replace him. She watched her grandchildren grow and marry and have children of their own, making her a great-grandmother. She saw Florence's 4th book published and watched Matthew expand the ranch to over 1,000 acres. She saw the world change, automobiles becoming common, women gaining the right to vote in 1920, the modern age arriving with all its promises and perils. In the spring of 1928, at 71 years old, Fiona Jefferson Brooks died peacefully in her sleep. She was buried beside Mason on the hill, finally reunited with the man who had given her everything that mattered. At her funeral, her great-granddaughter, a bright 10-year-old named Fiona in her honor, asked her mother, "Why does everyone say great-grandma was so special?" Young Florence, named for her grandmother, knelt beside her daughter. "Because she survived terrible things and still chose kindness. Because she was hurt and still chose to love. Because when someone gave her freedom, she used it to help other people become free." That's what makes someone special, not what happens to them, but what they do with it. The child considered this seriously. "I want to be like her." "You can be," Florence said. "You can choose every day to be strong and kind and brave just like she was." The Brooks family continued to thrive, generation after generation, all of them carrying the legacy of the woman who had been traded like cattle, until a cowboy bought her freedom and let her choose her path. And in choosing, she had built something beautiful: a life, a family, a future. Love had saved her, not by erasing the pain but by giving her a reason to heal. And in the end, that love had been returned 1,000-fold, rippling outward through time, touching lives she would never meet. On the hill overlooking the ranch, 2 headstones stood side by side. Mason Brooks, beloved husband, father, friend. And beside it, Fiona Jefferson Brooks, beloved wife, mother, survivor. Between them, carved into both stones, a simple phrase that captured everything: together always. And in the valley below, life continued. Cattle grazed, children played, gardens grew. The ranch that had been built on the foundation of one man's courage and one woman's strength continued to thrive, a testament to the transformative power of love and freedom. The story of Fiona and Mason became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that even from the darkest circumstances, hope could bloom. The wild west of cattle drives and lawless towns had given way to the modern era, but some things remained constant: the value of human dignity, the power of love to heal, and the truth that when someone chooses to stand up for what is right, they can change the world, one life at a time. Fiona and Mason had changed their world. They had built something lasting from the ruins of injustice. And that legacy, that gift of freedom and love, continued long after they were gone, proof that happy endings were not just for fairy tales but could be forged through courage, kindness, and unwavering love.